It was Valentine's Day in Oklahoma City, a day most people spend showing love. Susan Hamilton was getting ready to leave the house. Her hair was still wet, and she was fully dressed. Everything seemed normal, but something terrible happened. A short time later, her husband, Dr. John Hamilton, called 911 in a panic. What the police found inside their home was shocking. There was no break-in, nothing was stolen, just a violent crime and a lot of unanswered questions. At first, no one knew what to think. But as police looked closer, John's story started to fall apart. Was this a random attack, or was the truth much closer to home? In the heart of Oklahoma City, a love story began that would captivate and later shock an entire community. It started in 1985 when Susan, a single mother and devout Christian, was working as a nurse. She was a woman known for her warmth, integrity, and commitment to her faith. At a medical event that same year, her path crossed with Dr. John Hamilton, a highly regarded obstetrician and gynecologist. John was already a father and a respected figure in the medical field, admired for his confidence, charm, and intense dedication to his work. The connection between them was immediate. John was drawn to Susan's gentle nature and her unwavering values. She in turn found in John a supportive, attentive partner. Within 2 years, in 1987, they were married. Together, they built a life that many considered idyllic. Their home, a grand, elegant house in one of Oklahoma City's upscale neighborhoods, reflected the comfort and prosperity John's thriving medical practice provided. While John's clinic, where he specialized in women's reproductive health, was just a short drive from home, Susan had left her nursing job behind to focus on their marriage and their shared life. She poured her time into her community and church, quickly becoming a respected and active member of both. To outsiders, John and Susan Hamilton appeared to have it all. Their relationship seemed joyful and affectionate. They were often seen together, enjoying lavish vacations, romantic outings, and a lifestyle full of luxury. John was especially generous with gifts, buying Susan expensive jewelry, high-end cars, including a Porsche, and designer items that showcased not just their wealth, but his devotion. He was attentive, caring, and spared no effort in making Susan feel adored. And Susan, by all accounts, loved him just as deeply. Their marriage endured for over 15 years, marked by both shared accomplishments and private challenges. Still, they remained deeply committed. Though they didn't have children together, John already had a family from a previous relationship. They embraced their time as a couple, making the most of their financial success and emotional connection. Yet, beneath that picture-perfect surface, cracks would eventually form. And what seemed like a fairy tale would soon take a dark and tragic turn, one that no amount of wealth, love, or reputation could prevent. Over time, John became a central figure in the abortion debate. In addition to delivering babies and treating women's health issues, he also performed abortions at a local clinic in conservative Oklahoma. This part of his career brought not only moral opposition but personal danger. Activists regularly gathered outside his clinic, waving signs, distributing inflammatory flyers, and circulating his name and photo in efforts to shame or intimidate him. But the harassment didn't stop there. The hostility followed him home. Susan, his wife of more than a decade, began receiving disturbing phone calls. Some messages were so threatening that she reportedly feared for her life. Even with this cloud of fear hanging over them, the Hamiltons worked hard to maintain their image. They hosted elegant parties, remained active in their community, and lived what appeared to be a picture-perfect life. John never stopped showing affection for Susan. Every Valentine's Day, no matter how many years passed, was treated like a sacred occasion. It was their tradition to exchange heartfelt cards and small gifts, a ritual that never lost its romance. In 2001, there was no reason to believe it would be any different. That morning, February 14th, John started his day with work, leaving around 7 a.m. to perform surgery at the hospital. He was dressed in street clothes, which he swapped for scrubs upon arrival. At 8:40 a.m., Following the first procedure, he returned home briefly. According to John, he left a bouquet of flowers and a Valentine's card for Susan before heading back out for his second surgery of the morning. He claimed that she wasn't home at the time, but when he returned again later that morning, everything changed. John noticed something was off. The door was ajar, an unusual sight. Inside, the house was silent, uncomfortably still. As he walked through, nothing could prepare him for what he found next. Lying on the bathroom floor was Susan. She was covered in blood. Her injuries were horrifying. She had been strangled with 2 of John's own neckties. Her skull had been crushed with such force that brain matter was exposed. The murder weapon was never recovered. In a panic, John called 911. His voice trembled with desperation as he begged for help. "Please send police. Please send an ambulance. I think my wife is dead," he cried, claiming he had tried CPR but couldn't revive her. Emergency responders arrived within minutes. What they walked into was a nightmare. The scene suggested unfiltered rage. Blood was everywhere. It wasn't just an act of murder, it was overkill. The brutality pointed toward someone who had harbored deep personal hatred for Susan. But who could feel that way about a woman so universally admired? Officers quickly took note of details that didn't sit right. Both of the couple's cars were parked in the driveway. Inside, John's shirt and shoes were soaked in blood. Blood traces were also discovered in his car. Investigators couldn't ignore the inconsistencies, nor the overwhelming violence. At first, it made no sense. John and Susan had always seemed like the ideal couple. Loving, successful, generous. Their life looked like something out of a magazine. But the truth was far darker than anyone imagined. And by the end of that day, Valentine's Day would no longer be a symbol of romance. It would mark the beginning of a shocking investigation that tore apart everything the community thought it knew about John and Susan Hamilton. The initial shock of Susan Hamilton's murder rippled through the community, especially among those who knew the couple personally. Many simply couldn't believe that John could be responsible for such a brutal act. He was a respected doctor, a community figure, and most importantly, a grieving husband. But as investigators began to dig deeper, more cracks appeared in the pristine image he had cultivated. From the very start, detectives were struck by the sheer violence of the scene. Susan had been strangled so forcefully that the neckties had left deep indentations in her skin. Her skull had been shattered by blunt force, likely from an object that was never recovered. The crime appeared deeply personal, suggesting a killer, driven not by robbery or impulse, but by uncontrollable rage. Yet nothing had been stolen. There were no signs of forced entry. Valuables, including jewelry and electronics, were untouched. That immediately ruled out the possibility of a burglary gone wrong. This wasn't random. It felt targeted. John Hamilton's behavior in the immediate aftermath raised more questions. While he did appear distraught when he called 911, officers noted how quickly his story seemed rehearsed. He offered detailed explanations for where he had been and when. He repeated that Susan was already dead when he found her. But inconsistencies in his account soon began to emerge. For one, the timeline didn't quite fit. John said he left the house at 7 a.m. for surgery, returned around 8:40 a.m. to drop off flowers and a card, and then left again. But witnesses and hospital staff noted gaps in his schedule. The time he was supposedly away from Susan was short, possibly too short for a stranger to have entered the home, committed such a gruesome murder, and disappeared without a trace. Then came the forensic evidence. Investigators found blood spatter not only on John's clothes, but also inside his car. The patterns on his shirt didn't match what would be expected from someone simply performing CPR. They suggested he had been present during the attack. Furthermore, he claimed to have attempted CPR, but first responders noted that Susan's body was cold and stiff, indicating she had been dead for a while. Even more damning was the discovery of a Valentine's Day card Susan had written for John that morning. In it, she expressed love but also mentioned wanting to talk more and work things out. The tone was strained, almost as if she had doubts or concerns about their relationship. It was a small but significant sign that all was not well behind closed doors. That led detectives to look at the state of the Hamiltons' marriage. On the surface, it seemed perfect. But friends of Susan later revealed that the couple had recently faced serious challenges. Susan had discovered that John had been speaking to another woman, someone he had previously dated, and she was devastated. Though it's unclear how far the communication had gone, Susan had confronted John about it. Tension had been growing in the days leading up to her death. Some friends even reported that Susan was considering a separation or divorce. To the outside world, they were still smiling, still exchanging cards and flowers. But privately, Susan may have been questioning everything. That changed everything for investigators. A motive was beginning to form. Detectives speculated that John may have feared losing his wife, his reputation, and half of his wealth in a divorce. As a man who was used to control and admiration, the idea of Susan leaving him might have felt like a threat he couldn't accept. It was a theory that turned John from a grieving husband into the prime suspect. But there was still no eyewitness, no murder weapon, and no confession. The case would have to be built on forensic science, behavioral patterns, and circumstantial evidence. One of the key pieces of evidence came from the medical examiner. The autopsy revealed that Susan had died hours before John's 911 call. That directly contradicted his timeline and suggested that he may have killed her before leaving for work and then staged the discovery later. Another crucial detail involved his car. Though he claimed to have only gone to work and back, blood was found inside the vehicle, more than could be explained by casual contact. It suggested he had either transported something or attempted to clean himself up after the murder. Still, the defense team insisted that John was innocent. They painted him as a devoted husband, unfairly targeted by overzealous detectives. They argued that the scene was too brutal and chaotic to be the work of a man like John, who was meticulous and controlled. They also leaned heavily on his community reputation, reminding jurors of his years of service and the lives he had delivered into the world. But the prosecution had a different narrative. They argued that John's control over his life and his image was precisely the reason he snapped. He had everything to lose. And on Valentine's Day, when Susan gave him a card that hinted at disappointment rather than devotion, he may have lost control. After months of investigation, John Hamilton was arrested and charged with the murder of his wife. The community was stunned. Many still refused to believe it. Others whispered that they had always suspected something darker beneath his polished exterior. The trial became a media spectacle. Every detail of the couple's life was laid bare. Friends were called to testify. Susan's letters and notes were analyzed for hidden meanings. Experts debated blood patterns and psychological profiles. And through it all, John maintained his innocence. But the jury didn't believe him. The evidence, though circumstantial, was overwhelming. The lack of forced entry, the blood in the car, the bruises on Susan's body, the inconsistencies in John's story, and the subtle but powerful message in Susan's final Valentine's Day card. After just 2 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict. Guilty of first-degree murder. John Hamilton was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He remains incarcerated to this day. Susan's murder was a tragedy that shook Oklahoma City and the nation. It was a chilling reminder that appearances can be deceiving, and that even the most outwardly perfect relationships can hide. In the years following his conviction, John Hamilton's case has continued to spark debate. Supporters argue that he was wrongly accused, convicted based on assumptions rather than definitive proof. They point out the lack of physical evidence tying him directly to the murder weapon, and they claim that the investigation was clouded by confirmation bias from the beginning. However, for many others, the weight of the forensic evidence, paired with the crumbling facade of a seemingly perfect marriage, points to an inescapable conclusion. To them, the details don't lie. The blood spatter, the timing, the motive, all align too neatly to be coincidence. What makes the Hamilton case so haunting isn't just the brutality of the crime, but the context in which it happened. This wasn't a random act of violence. It wasn't a crime of poverty, or desperation, or even passion in the heat of the moment. It was, prosecutors argued, a calculated decision made by a man who couldn't bear the thought of losing control. Valentine's Day, a day that should have been filled with affection, became instead a chilling symbol of betrayal, rage, and irreversible loss. And it's that contrast that has burned the story into the public's memory. Susan Hamilton's death also brought renewed attention to the often hidden dynamics of domestic abuse. Although there were no police reports, no public fights, and no previous signs of violence, the cracks in their relationship suggested emotional turbulence beneath the surface. Her final card, with its restrained tone and call for conversation, hinted at a woman trying to navigate uncertainty, perhaps even fear. It serves as a powerful reminder that abuse doesn't always wear visible scars. It can live quietly in the spaces between smiles, beneath polite conversations, and behind carefully curated lives. Sometimes the danger lies not in strangers, but in those closest to us. For true crime followers and legal analysts alike, the Hamilton case remains a textbook example of a conviction built without direct eyewitnesses. Instead, it relied on the convergence of forensic science, behavioral evidence, and logical deduction. In that sense, it is both fascinating and unsettling, because it shows how a narrative can be constructed from fragments and how juries can be swayed by the way those pieces fit together. There were appeals, as expected. Hamilton's defense team pushed for retrials, argued mishandling of evidence, and cited procedural errors. But none succeeded. Every appeal was denied. The conviction stood firm. For Susan's family, that meant a degree of closure. Though no verdict can ever erase the pain of such a loss. In interviews years later, friends described Susan as kind, thoughtful, and deeply loyal. She was a former model who had embraced family life, who had tried to work through her marriage struggles, and who didn't deserve what happened to her. Her story has since been featured in numerous documentaries, books, and podcasts. And with every retelling, one haunting question persists. What if she had left sooner? What if she had told someone more explicitly what was going on? If, in fact, there was more to tell? The reality is, we may never know everything that happened in the final days or hours of Susan Hamilton's life. But what we do know is enough to remind us that even the most loving gestures, the most romantic days, can sometimes conceal unimaginable horror. Today, the house where Susan was killed has long since changed hands, but neighbors still remember the headlines. They still recall the flashing police lights, the television crews, the shock of hearing that Dr. Hamilton had been arrested, and for many, the memory of that day hasn't faded. It remains one of Oklahoma's most infamous cases, not because it involved celebrities or conspiracies, but because it revealed something far more disturbing. That behind the masks we wear, even love can turn lethal. In the end, the case of John and Susan Hamilton stands as a cautionary tale about appearances, assumptions, and the hidden corners of domestic life. It's a story that forces us to ask difficult questions. How well do we really know the people we love? What secrets might be hiding in plain sight? And when everything looks perfect on the outside, should we be paying even closer attention? Unspeakable darkness. In a country built on freedom, justice doesn't always come easy. But here on Crimes of America, We dig deeper, past the headlines, beneath the surface, into the heart of every haunting case that shook a nation. If this story left you questioning everything, you're not alone. There are more shadows to explore, more voices to uncover, and more truths that refuse to stay buried. Subscribe for weekly deep dives into the darkest corners of American crime. Like, share, and hit that bell, because the next story might be closer than you think. This is Crimes of America, where every case tells a deeper story, and every story leaves a mark. Subscribe and like for more stories.